And Randy?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor and Council, just to remind you, we were directed by you all to take a look at our fees, impact fees, update them. We already have done the transportation fee, if we remember, a few months ago or so, I believe it was. Lost track now. I'm here actually on, again, Tiffany's behalf. She's on a well-deserved vacation. Berlin is filling in for her, so I'll introduce her in a minute and kick it off. Again, what we were directed to do is take the current modeling program system that we have in place today and just use that to update the fees for this year. The goal, as directed by the council, is to look at updating our model for creating these fees or looking at these fees, analyzing these fees, and we can come back to you probably about this time next year, having used that updated model and look at the fee recommendation again at that time. So again, this evening we're just here to update the fees that were directly impacted, and that's what these individuals are here to talk about. So with that, Berlin, I'll kick it off to you and introduce. We did contract with BBC that originally created the model we're using quite a few years, I think.
2013. Yeah. So this is Iris McClish, and this is Stephanie Ayers from BBC. They have a short presentation for us, and I'm sure as you have questions, feel free.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks for having us here. I'm Iris McClish. I'm a director with BBC Research. Along with my partner Kevin Williams, we lead work related to impact analyses, impact fees, and fiscal analyses. I'm actually filling in for Kevin this evening as he's at another impact fee presentation for another municipality. So I am actually going to turn it over to Stephanie. She's going to very, very briefly walk you through some background and methodology before presenting the updated fees. I'm going to serve as her slide advancer.
So my name is Stephanie Ayers. I'm a research associate with BBC Research and Consulting. The topics we're going to cover, we're going to go over a little bit of the project background, an overview of impact fees and what they are, how they're calculated, and then recommendations. So the purpose of this project was to calculate proportional and defensible impact fees to impose on new development, and that's done to assure that new growth pays its own way and contributes to the fiscal health of the district. So as Randy was saying, we did conduct the original impact fee study in 2013, and then we conducted an update in 2014 using updated asset valuation and debt allocation information. So impact fees, there's no universally accepted definition for impact fees, but what we want to emphasize is their one-time use, their application to new development, design requirements for proportionality. And what I mean by that is that the impact fee is based off of current development and will be proportional to the degree of new development. So they're broken down into a fee per new residential unit or the amount of new square footage of non-residential space. And then the fee revenue can only be used for infrastructure expansion purposes. There's a strong legal basis for impact fees. Colorado statute specifies, again, that it can only be a one-time charge on new development. It can only, the revenue can only be used for growth-related capital infrastructure projects, no repair, maintenance, or replacement, and any assets or facilities that are purchased with the impact fee revenue has to have at least a 5-year life. It can't be used, the funds can't be used for the correction of existing system deficiencies. They have to be kept in a separate fund segregated from other general revenue. It has to be applied against all land use types, and then there has to be a reasonable expectation of benefit by the taxpayer. There have also been a few instances where impact fee cases have made it all the way to the Supreme Court, so we've taken into account all the legalities surrounding impact fees to ensure that the fees that we're proposing are legally defensible.
Going back, actually, the criteria of what you can use it for. Is one of the criteria, let's call it modernization, so bringing a facility up to new standards, et cetera, would that qualify under impact fees?
No, it has to be completely new development, so it can't be improving or improving programs or current facilities. It has to be brand new development.
So installation of a solar panel energy.
Are you asking what to charge the impact fee for, what it can be used for?
Right,
Absolutely.
what it can be used for. What it can be used for.
No question?
Does an impact fee have to be used for the development that it was collected for?
No, it doesn't.
It can be used in another place.
Correct.
Thank you.
So actually, our next slide goes into a little more of what the fee revenue can be used for. So there are 3 types of capital projects, but they're not all related to new development. So 2 things that you can't use impact fee revenue for are repair and replacement of facilities and then betterment of facilities, just to touch on the question. And so they have to be used for expansion of facilities to accommodate new development. And then there are some fee design considerations. The first is definition of community standards. Essentially what this means is that facility standards can vary widely across communities, and for that reason, impact fees should always be specifically tailored to the community in question. The second is calculation of proportional attribution to growth. So again, fees should be proportional to the new development in question, whether that's one residential dwelling unit or a certain amount of square footage of commercial development. And then lastly, attribution of infrastructure needs across all major land uses. And that means that infrastructure needs should be considered for both residential and all types of non-residential land use. So the methodology that we used is referred to as the capital improvement methodology or plan-based methodology. There are several advantages and disadvantages of this methodology. The advantage is that it's intuitively fair. It specifically considers future capital needs. It's tailored to the future. And then some disadvantages. It does require a higher level of data accuracy. There are some assumptions and predictions that go into the model, and that the fee fluctuates based on capital needs. So to reiterate, future growth drives the need for new infrastructure, and then all eligible costs are allocated to future growth. Some other fee design considerations, adjustments for debt. So calculation of community standards must recognize and net out any debt. Fee design cost recovery, the cost of the study can be recovered through fees and then used to reimburse the general fund. Proportionality, again, fees must only cover the proportional expansion costs caused by new development. Allocation by land use, all forms of development that have facility impacts must pay their fair share of the expansion costs. Use specificity. So detailed non-residential use or other specificity is merited when there's evidence that use or size variations reflect differences in the demand for public service. And then redevelopment and credits. Impact fees can raise questions about the redevelopment of existing properties and the circumstances under which fees can be waived or adjusted, but it's important to emphasize that if an existing building is demolished and then reconstructed, that this does not equate to new development. Redevelopment will only charge impact fees on the basis of net new space. Waivers.
Explain that one again, please.
So essentially, if a current building is demolished and then reconstructed, that wouldn't qualify.
Right. Okay, clarification, reconstructed is the same purpose, same everything?
So the square footage that you originally had would not count towards impact fees. So if you demolished a building that was 100,000 square feet and you built a new building that was 300,000 square feet, the fee would only be assessed to the 200, that net difference.
So we demolish a shopping center and build apartments.
Yeah, so the difference would be between you would be assessed on the difference between the square footage.
Even if the use changes?
That's, I think, a little bit trickier. We'd have to
I'm not
look
totally
more
sure
into
about
that, because I think if you're changing use, because the way that the fees are assessed are on land use, so either residential or some sort of commercial. So then you would have to take into account the difference between how the fees were originally allocated and adjust for that, plus the net.
My experience, if I may, on an issue like that with land use changes, typically your ordinance has to take into account some kind of a credit there based on trip generation for the new land use. So for example, in this particular example, if you had a shopping center that had a trip generation of X amount, and there's manuals to actually estimate all that, and you have a new use that would be like apartments, that would have another trip generation. So if there's actually an increase in the trip generation, you pay that difference. So typically, that's how an impact fee structure would be allocated for a change of use type. And so I'm looking to them to kind of reinforce that I'm correct.
So, question then, I don't know who's going to answer it, but on the, somewhere in there you said about 58, for using the museum as an example, 58% of the folks there are Littleton folks. How close do we really keep track that it's 58%? And also, if it's others coming in from outside the city, like say, even the school district is outside, part of it, outside the city, they're still coming in, but how is it that we can't add that as part of the percentage?
So the first part of your question, how closely?
Yeah, that was a two-part question. I like to throw it in.
So the 58% is from a survey, and that data was sent over to us by Tiffany, and that was from a survey that the museum conducted. And they said that 58% of their visitors are Littleton residents, and so these impact fees are meant to be levied on residents. They're intended to be levied on them for their use. So for that reason, we only allocated, we attributed the 58% as the residential share for museums.
And so the second part of your question, I mean, I think that's a question for you all as well, but it's because these impact fees are intended to be levied on residents, I think it's a difficult argument to make if you're bringing in visitors from outside of the residential area and imposing a fee based on that proportion of visitors on your actual residents. So that's the sticky point in that second part of your
But
question.
impact fee, residents aren't paying an impact fee, it's the developer.
Well, the developers, but they're still,
Yeah, they, a lot of times.
If that's on, it's not a direct charge, still, it could be calculated in there.
So I'm trying to understand this across things. We have roads, like we have Broadway, and we've got Santa Fe, and a couple other roads that have traffic, pass-through traffic that jams us up big time. Because they're using our roads. So if people use our museum and our library and come and do things at City Center, even if they're not residents, why isn't that an impact?
that's a great question. I think it's definitely worth exploring as you all move into the next phase of this over the next year, which is reassessing the model. This model was designed based on methodologies that were approved in 2013. So I think as part of the upcoming year, it's looking into whether there are more tailored and more nuanced ways that we can capture that type of information.
Well, I think we absolutely need to do that. We have an incredible museum that attracts people from all over. And I wanted to keep doing that. I mean, it's part of who we are and whatever. And I think that should be counted and celebrated and factored into this.
So Mark, that's a decision that we'll have to discuss at some other time on how we're going to calculate it.
Yeah, if you remember in the budget discussion, we just recognized that we have the existing model. And in the interest of being timely, here we are now early March, we were going to just update the existing model. And the intent is to fully explore other alternatives to assess impact fees, but we wanted to get the comprehensive plan complete because as part of the comp plan, we're also going to be doing a transportation master plan for the first time. And there's very specific modeling that lends us to look at a very different approach, certainly for traffic. And I think that we'll have a conversation, probably again in the budget process here this fall about the types of methodologies we could look at and be positioned to pursue, and obviously a cost estimate. But that was, again, the conversation last fall. So we'll take on a much bigger effort here this next year.
Yeah. And I think to address your concern, I think the 58% is we can't charge our residents 100% of the impact of the museum when they're not using 100% of the museum. It's other people that are using it.
Just
Right, and it's hard to charge people driving through the road unless you want to put a toll on Santa Fe of people passing through. And it's the same thing. It's hard to charge non-residents of the museum. Can I see your ID? Okay, you go $5. You can go in for free.
I'm a confused. So there are specific regulations for the groups of impacts that you went through. As long as you stay within the use of the impact fees, what are the, aside from hitting some point of pain that you can't really justify, the methodologies, there's nothing that is mandated on that, except that you need to be able to justify what it is, right? So our old methodologies are just our old, and I don't like them, and I don't really like the new ones are based on those. I mean, those all need to be thrown out. And I think we need to be a lot more aggressive.
Yeah, so we're going to have to change the way we calculate, because that 58% is nowhere near accurate.
Mm-hmm. So I want to be very conscious and mindful tonight of where we're seeing these places where we've kind of got these low returns, these snags. Because I think that part of what before 2013, we didn't even charge impact fees. So, now we like them. Now we like them. But we've also got a limited amount of opportunity in terms of larger development. Then you end up with just some smaller redevelopment. So the opportunity for the benefit of the impact fees does start to be reduced just in terms of land isn't available anymore. So I think that that's where kind of the urgency in terms of getting these things up to a place where we can make that stuff happen, because we've got some triggers getting pulled in the next few months or so, and I want to have something in place that we can get full capitalization on.
Yeah, because I think your estimate was, 80-some thousand is really all it increases by. That's, budget-wise, that's nothing.
Yeah, and as Stephanie mentioned, one of the disadvantages of this land use based methodology is that there are some pretty broad assumptions that have to be made. So it's definitely warranted reassessing and redesigning.
So maybe when we go through this, if you guys could, based on your knowledge, say to us, this is a place where you guys where there needs to be a reassessment, or this is a place where we think that you could do better. So maybe give us some of that feedback as we go through.
Sure. It's just.
And then again, for the 58% for the museum, that is how the model was initially developed, was off of survey data, and that survey data has been updated, so that percentage was updated with this fee update. But again, if that is something that's agreed upon, that 100% of it should be charged, included in the impact fees, you can certainly let us know that if that's a decision that you come to, and we'll take that into consideration.
So you're saying the share has changed from 58% to something else now?
It was, I don't remember off the top of my head, I think that it was a higher percentage in 2014, the last time we conducted the update, but I know that it changed. All right, so pick up where we left off, the 2019 fee update. So the changes in data that we took into account for this update were updated asset valuations, updated debt allocation, and then updated land use distribution, and we updated the fees for the museum, the library, police, and facilities. So the first fee category that we updated was for the museum. For the capital infrastructure analysis, we estimated the allocated replacement value for all facilities and assets that are associated with the museum. And again, we are charging a residential share of 58% based on survey data. So the value of capital infrastructure for the museum used for the impact fee calculation is 58% of the total value of museum infrastructure at the moment. Next slide. So you can see here that the impact fees for the museum are allocated to entirely residential land uses. And this is because the demand for museum services is not significantly affected by non-residential land uses. And then the fee here has been calculated by dividing the cost by category by the existing development units. So we took the figure from the capital infrastructure analysis and divided it by the number of residential units within the city of Littleton. And then the next fee category was the library. So the only asset or facility we had was the library itself, and that includes the contents inside the library, which puts it at about just under $12 million. And then impact fees for the library are also allocated to entirely residential land uses for the same reasoning that they are for the museum, because the demand is not significantly affected by non-residential land uses. And then again, the fee is determined by just dividing the cost by category by existing development.
Is there any precedent for having residential and then dividing non-residential into different uses and having impact fees? Because if you think back to the museum, sure, our residents are using the museum. People coming in to the city are using the museum. You could make an argument that people are coming here, having lunch or shopping, and then going to use the museum as well. I mean, it may not be the same as for industrial use, but if there are certain impacts for different types of non-residential use, do you know if there's any?
You're saying that that people would come to Littleton for a non-residential purpose, and then while they're in Littleton, visit the museum?
Or if they're at a restaurant or if they're shopping, they could use the police for some, if there's cars broken into. So they're, is there precedent for?
And police fees and facilities fees are applied to proportionally to residential and non-residential development. It's only the library and the museum that are applied only 100% to residential development.
So I think that, because I had the same thought, we are attracting people to Littleton as a destination, and the museum is one of those reasons, among many others, right? So it's our downtown, our businesses, our restaurants, our shops, and all these other amenities. So we are intentionally attracting outside into our community, which has an impact to an amenity like the museum. So it's how do we capture, it comes back to what Peggy was saying, is how do we capture that, and can we apply an impact fee to non-residential? Because the more commercial, the more entertainment and other amenities are out there, it becomes a bigger destination, or desirable destination.
And again, it's kind of the same thing with the 58%. That is something that was implemented in the original model in 2013. If that is something that the city council agrees that you want to change and that you think that it should be applied to non-residential development, we can certainly take that into consideration. What we've done in the past is create an addendum to an impact fee report, offering alternative possibilities for fee calculations. So if you wanted us to develop an alternative model that attributes museum fees to residential and non-residential land use and attributes 100% of the value of the museum, we could certainly do that. And you could, as a city council, sit down and see where the differences are and before you adopt the impact fee model.
That goes back to the other, like I said, we got to have a conversation about it. Not tonight, but
Yeah.
we got to get through the presentation.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I think that we need to look into whether there's legal precedence for this, because I think there's a little bit of nuance that we're missing in the conversation, is that these fees are associated with the increase in facilities and capital that are created by the need that is coming out of the new residents and the new commercial space. So the fee has to be fairly and appropriately assessed to that. So I'm not sure that we have to look into the legality of whether you can assess a fee, assess a residential and a commercial fee based on visitors coming into it, because they are very, very limited in scope in how you can assess them. So we'll definitely take a look at whether there's any legal precedence or some more creative.
For tonight, let's just accept 58% and move on.
Well, and in the world of impact fees, the library and the museum are really the bottom. I mean, that's where, the real impact fees are in other areas. That's where the dollars get bigger. So.
But you mentioned.
Sorry, Tim. Get that 58% out of it.
Well, and just let me clarify for council, and maybe I should have expounded a little bit more at the beginning. We've already started a process to create an RFP to go out and, again, ask for proposals for try to tweak this model or amend it at this time. It was to get some new fees in place ASAP and then go out and do an RFP for a new model that we'll look at. Again, don't forget, this model was created by a previous council. Those percentages were set that were given. So that's not the purpose of tonight, is to try to remodel the model. It's to make sure you're comfortable with the fees as they were assessed under this model, and then bring that forward as an
We know
ordinance.
we don't like the old model.
We knew
Know
that.
that.
Remember, according to that, we all agreed to that.
We're really sure about that. Okay.
We just want to make sure you're really sure.
We're certain.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Go through these really quick.
Yeah.
All right, and then the capital infrastructure analysis for police, we have the value of the facilities and equipment, and then we netted out the outstanding debt for the dispatch equipment. And then police fees are allocated to both residential and non-residential development. So cost by category is the value of the the police facilities and assets divided into categories based on the burden distribution. And then for facilities as well, we have the facilities valued at about $45 million once you net out the outstanding debt for the courthouse. And so the fee calculation for the facilities also takes into account residential and non-residential development. All right, and then lastly, we have a fee summary. This is a fee comparison showing the current fees versus the 2019 fees. We are recommending a fee increase across all categories that we updated. And as you know, fire fees were part of our original fee study in 2013 and our fee update in 2014, but because of the dissolution of the fire department, these fees are at zero. And then, as Randy stated, the transportation fees were very recently updated, so those are not part of our fee update either. And then some summary and recommendations. The city should adhere to a written policy governing its expenditure of monies from the impact fee fund. You should maintain the impact fee fund separate and apart from the general fund. The fees should be updated periodically and also updated annually based on established inflation indices.
And I might add that your methodology should be reassessed and
All right, so next steps, to make any final adjustments to the fee system, we'll prepare a final impact fee report and fee schedule, and then final step is for adoption by the city council. Were there any additional questions?
yes, ma'am.
I may have missed this if you addressed it way back in the beginning, where you talk about the Colorado statute. You listed in there that there's a 5-year life.
Correct.
Is that on the fees are collected, that you have 5 years to spend those?
No, it's just that the revenue, so it actually is kind of twofold. So it's any assets or facilities that their value is used to calculate the impact fees, they must have a 5-year life, and then anything that the fee revenue is used for also has to have a 5-year life.
At least 5 years.
Okay.
On the methodology, is there like a minimum value to that asset? So if it's $50,000, are we still going to assess $5,000, or is there like a minimum, like floor?
Our city charter states that a capital asset has to be $5,000 or more, but I think that all of them are pretty much listed out for you in the presentation. So you can go through and see what the current values are. The current values used here are from the 2019 CIRSA report. So these are the most current values that we have.
And this comes back to the comment of we need to reassess this. When we look at non-residential, so a warehouse at 1,000 square feet has a different impact than a hotel at 1,000 square feet. And so are those some of the things that you kind of see out there of looking more at the use and the impact of the use as opposed to the footprint?
Yeah, and in fact, the way that you assess impact fees can be different for different types of commercial and residential space. So you could apply an impact fee differently for multi-family housing versus single-family housing. So we'd love to take a look at both both sides of that.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate your work.
And I'll leave a couple cards here, so if anybody else has any other questions that pop up, we'd be happy to answer those for you.
How quickly are we implementing? How quickly will this get implemented?
Actually, I think the first reading of the ordinance is next week.
All right, cool, thank you.
Good luck with the rest of your evening. Thanks so much.
2 weeks.
Is it 2 weeks?
March 19th, right now we have penciled out March 19th.
I'm thinking in terms of the study session.
I know.
Forgive me.
That's okay.
2 weeks.
Yeah, we
2
don't.
weeks.
Okay.
Another exciting program here.
And Darlene.
She's going to stick around for that, too.
Oh, I thought she was trying to sneak out.
Yeah, it's all good, it's all good.
Okay, council, this is regarding the Littleton Immigrant Resource Center. The proposal for 2019 was presented by Tim Nims from the museum. And
I'll be part of everything. Early will correct my numbers as that.
yes, Early will,
We'll see.
she'll check your
She always does.
applications and exaggerations.
I will do my best to be factual. Evening, Mayor and Council. For the benefit of the audience, I'll remind folks that last year in September, as we were completing the 2019 budget process, we were notified by the federal government that they would not be renewing the USCIS grant that LARC, the Immigrant Resource Center, had received for the past 6 years. We were really thrilled that they waited until 10 days before the current grant expired to let us know that. But at that point, city manager recommended and council approved adding an additional $125,000 into the Immigrant Resource Center budget in order to fund the citizenship and legal services components, which had been grant funded. So the proviso to that funding was that we would come back to you with recommendations on how to improve revenue, look for ways to find alternative sources of funding for those components of the program. So that's the purpose of this evening's presentation. We have studied the market here in the Denver metro area, and we're proposing an increase to a number of our fee scales. We're still going to be well within the market, and we look exclusively at other nonprofits that were providing the same or similar services to what we were doing. And we think that we can bring in about 30% of that $125,000 through increases in our fee schedules. These will put us, as I say, much more in line with what the market is doing. Previously, we were pretty much locked into the parameters by the federal grant, so this gives us a little more flexibility, but we feel very comfortable that we'll still be very competitive in the market. We're well under the fee scales of all the private immigration law firms in the metro area, so this will do a good job of moving in the right direction for council's direction. We're also planning and continuing to look at other grant funding sources. Last week, I met with Tia Cavender, who's the principal from Dig Deep, the research company that finances engaged for a number of other grant-related possibilities, and they're going to be taking on LARC. We've added a addendum to the contract. Into the contract.
It will be.
It will be. It will be all right. So we'll be working with them to try to identify some additional funding sources. They primarily focus on corporate and foundation funding, so I think those are some areas we have never really dived into. So I think this gives us some definite possibilities out there.
Yeah, so on the 125, that does not include staff time or facility time, right?
That actually is all inclusive for the costs of those two components of the program. So that
So it
covers
is-
the entire, yes, that covers staff and any of the
Clean up the whole
costs.
thing, yeah.
Yeah, so
Did you
we'll-
consider at all looking at, if we created our own grant, say $100,000 of some sort? Did you consider that, or think about that at all, about if we're gonna lose 100,000, say, well, what about if we set up our own grant that we distribute?
And awarded it to ourselves.
No, to other nonprofits, they're out there doing it.
I see.
They're out there doing it, then it would cut back on our staff time that's involved in facilities.
I suppose that would be a way to go, but the one thing I will note is that there are very few similar, comparable programs in the South Metro area. We're pretty much it, other than Denver, Boulder, and Aurora at this point. There are some other areas that are looking at certain similar services, but none of them are in the South Metro area.
And our program's very good. I'm not saying
I get what you're saying.
How are those other programs funded?
They're primarily funded through donations or through their fee schedule.
And what percentage of those people that come through are Littleton citizen?
It varies from program to program. I will say that probably the legal services component is the smallest percentage of Littleton residents. And again, since we are kind of the only game in the South Metro area, we pull people from around the metro area, mostly South Metro. Our English language classes and language partners are two of the programs that have always been, or components have always been funded by the city. Those are predominantly our Littleton residents. Citizenship is is probably about a 60-40 mix, and then legal services is probably less than that. And I would guess it's probably 50-50 or 40-60.
So do we get any participation from anybody from South Metro, from any of the other cities, or?
As far as clients? Yeah.
No, not as far as clients, as far as funds.
We do not. In the past, it's been completely funded by the USCIS grant.
Right. So
we are going to be looking at other funding options, and those would include, say corporations, foundations. We may look at some of the other. One of the things that has been suggested is we might want to look at some of the other governmental entities in the metro, South Metro area in particular, because they're using our services to some extent.
Right.
I was under the impression, I feel like I saw last year that Highlands Ranch also had this program last year.
Highlands Ranch has been looking at it. As far as I know, they haven't instituted it yet. And they were looking at possibility of putting it in one of their in the Highlands Ranch branch of the Douglas County Library.
Right. So I like what you're saying, Pat, about if this is really serving the South Metro region. I think that's another area that we need to look at is, what are our partners?
I agree. Yeah, I think we should look at that.
Share the
Have we talked to the county about some money?
We have not talked to the county, but that was one of the comments that Tiffany had made when we were visiting about this, was we may want to look. I think the county is just one of the governmental partners that would be a potential. But I think that's definitely one that we have to look at, and maybe not just Arapahoe County, but Douglas and Jefferson as well.
There has to be an acknowledgement that as we go out there, we, in many ways, are providing that just because of the facilities alone. That's, call it an in-kind value to,
absolutely,
even just the use of the facility. So I think it is very reasonable and fair to ask for it.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think largely the reason this hasn't come up before is because it was a fully federally grant-funded program. So now we're in the position of if that grant, and we will reapply for the grant. From what we have seen from the awards, it doesn't look like they're doing a lot of grant funding to governmental entities. It looks like they're mostly going with nonprofits and faith-based organizations for this grant, which I think is you have a change of administration, you have a change of focuses and how they want to fund. But I think this gives us an opportunity to look for some of those other partners now.
So maybe a strategy we have to look at is there a private entity or nonprofit entity in Littleton that could be the recipient of that grant, like the Life Center?
Mm-hmm.
And then again, we can provide the library as a place, but the entity that's seeking the grant becomes private or nonprofit within the city.
We hadn't talked about the Life Center, although I think that would definitely be a possibility. We have talked about potentially Immigrant Pathways in Colorado, which is the nonprofit semi-support group. And if you needed a nonprofit to be the grant recipient itself, that would be possible.
I think one of the things that would be maybe timely and particularly given our next conversation, something that would, I think, be beneficial for the Service Act. So when this started, it was really just on a shoestring, and then the city was doing a lot of the funding on it, and then the grants came in because the city you're going to need to fund this stuff yourself. You can't keep doing it. The grants came in. Grants are fickle. We know that. We've seen it happen all the time. So now we're back. The city is funding again, and now we're raising fees, and we're still 70% short. So I think it would be a good idea to take a 5-year look at this and really plan it out, and with the intention that at the 5-year, we are either part of a larger conglomerate in the South Metro area where there are entities that have better opportunity to receive grants than government, and where there's a coalition built that has a higher level of survival potential, as opposed to nursing this along each year, not knowing what's going to happen. And I think, in terms of the need is not going away. The need is getting greater. The service provided, if you've gone to one of the ceremonies, you see the service provided, and when you have people from 35 countries that are getting their immigration status and what they've gone through and their families are to celebrate, this is important stuff. And I think we need to get it into a place where it's safe, because it's just not safe right now. And I also, while I appreciate having it at the library, they're out of space. They have been for a long time.
Absolutely.
So they're sardined in there, and so we need a better space to have it. And so there's a lot of things that need to be improved on this. So maybe looking at a 5-year and how we can get this into a place where it has that stability and greater opportunity for long-term success.
I think that's entirely fair, Mayor, and I think that's actually exactly the strategy that we were trying to look at. I don't know whether 5 years is what we're thinking, but we definitely feel like we need to come up with a model that's going to work and be sustainable. And one of the things that we absolutely will consider is we could certainly retrench. We could go back to being what the Immigrant Resource Center originally was, which is a resource center for information, English language courses, language partners, which is the one-on-one piece. Those were always funded under the city umbrella, and they were sort of the original components of the program, if you will. The 2 grant-funded programs, the citizenship track and the legal services track, were designed, in fact, that if the grant went away, those components could go away also. Now, obviously, we've got some skin in the game now, having done it for 6 years, but it is something we're absolutely considering, and that has to be on the table as well, we think.
Excellent. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Keith, you ready?
They were great. Just checking out. Good. All right. Moving. You've been sitting longer here than I have.
So, we're going to, our third item on study is the Open Space Task Force report. Long awaited. Keith will be presenting the report. This is just to kind of set the table a little bit, that in the budget in 2018, when we came into the open space, we did move one of the projects forward, but we really put brakes on and said, we need to take a look at this from a component of what are the asks out there, what are the needs, what are the things that have been committed. There's a variety of opportunities with this fund. There's also quite a bit of limitations with the fund. But then there's also opportunities with partnerships, with other additional grant monies, and then so the money can expand and contract based on how efficiently we use it and how we plan it and how we work it. There's a lot of demand on this money because it's a steady stream and it covers some things that you don't really want to have to pay for out of the general fund. So, and we have partners who have become accustomed to us partnering with them on some projects. So all that, given all of that, plus the fact that we have about 5 different master plans that have been done over the last 7, 8, 9 years that include biking ped, parks and trails, river, open space, etc. And there's, based on community input and ratification by the various boards, there's an element of commitment made there. But what does that look like? We got to put all that together. And then there's this fictional number out there, 400 do, what are our priorities, how do we spend the money? So we put this task force together, and they came back with recommendations on a number of different levels that will hopefully, what the intention, council, is that we're not making any decisions on this funding tonight, but this is what will go into the process for when we do make decisions about how we spend that open space money. And so looking for blessings on the process that's been being recommended, and I think blessings on the process. Okay, and then that will be what, once we've blessed that, kind of, I think we'll actually bring back the recommendations from the task force and ask council in a resolution to approve that. And then that will be what staff will use going forward in presenting open space, or money to come out of the open space task force. This is how, so you will have a new matrix when we look at that line item on the budget. So just trying to set things up, Keith.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Keith Reister, Public Works Director. Obviously, you know Arlene. She's been here, twice already. So, I'm here to support that. I'm going to start with, I created some additional handouts for tonight that I thought would help in the discussion. So I'm just going to send those around. One of them is this. There's plenty for the audience as well. One of this is a map of all the open space properties that we own or participate in from a financial standpoint up to this point in time. So that's what this one is. The second one is during the course of the presentation, you're going to hear me refer to various other partners along the way. And so this table, this other sheet, lists 7 frequent partners for us in the open space world, and it just kind of talks about who they are, what they do, and how we've partnered with them in the past from a relationship perspective. So these will be a couple things we can refer to in the course of the discussion that will probably be helpful as well. The other thing is I added some pictures to the presentation and shortened some of the text. So I was on a tight deadline with the clerk, so you got pictures after the fact, so you'll see those up here. Maybe it's a little more entertaining at home. That's my goal. So as the mayor said, back last fall, we kicked off this process of taking a look at how are we going to go forward with open space. We have a whole bunch of plans out there. We have an adopted open space and trails master plan. We have a whole bunch of other plans out there, plus partner agencies have plans. And so the goal was to kind of take a look at all of those and bring some new recommendations together. In 2012, there was an open space task force that prepared a report. The primary chunk of that report was focused on acquisitions in that 2012 report. Of that 2012 report, there were 16 potential parcels that were listed. Of those, 9 are either in some other form. We might have them, they've been developed. There's not a possibility we can get them. And so that's kind of the status of where we've been in the last 6 years related to acquisitions. So I'm going to kind of walk through what the task force looked at and what they came up with and share the recommendations that they put together. So first of all, this is based on the 2012 report with studies. Also, there's in those last 7 years, there have been a whole bunch of other plans and studies done, including many of our own. And so it's important for us to synthesize those and bring them together in a way that creates a clear planning path for us as a staff and as a city to know where we're going so that we can be as effective as possible. So this was the goal of the task force. The other part of this was, so you're going to see some recommendations on how to spend the money on percentages. Well, that doesn't necessarily match up with reality based on what we know is forthcoming. So we're going to talk about the painful task that Arlene and Tiffany undertook to try and match those up a little bit as well. So this was the task force members. Most of this task force was on the 2012 task force, with the exception of me and Mike, I think, on this one. And as you can see, we had pretty good range: South Suburban, the mayor, Trust for Public Land, some local citizens, as well as Arapahoe County Open Space. And Josh is our primary relationship there. These are just a small snippet of reports that we felt impacted the overall open space decision-making here in Littleton. The South Platte River Corridor Vision Plan, Hudson Gardens Master Plan, our own Open Space Parks and Trails Master Plan, South Suburban Master Plan, the Arapahoe County Bike and Ped Plan, Highline Canal Framework that's ongoing right now, the South Platte Connection Study by South Platte Working Group, which is underway now, as well as our own Transportation Master Plan, which will bring some of this information to the forefront. What's important is in the report itself, you will see that we took every one of these reports and we said why we think it's important and what are the things that need to rise out of that as we look at the bigger planning document. So at the end of the day, every single one of these has their own set of priorities. And for us to operate effectively, we need to be able to merge those and understand collectively what those priorities are and how that fits together. That then allows us to go after how we're going to use our money, how we're going to leverage our money, and what we're going to target for other funding sources. So that's really the target of this particular group of plans. So there's a whole bunch of, we have some rationale why this is, but what we asked the committee to do was there's two buckets of money. There's what we have in reserve today, which is $2.7 million, which came to us through previous open space allocations, primarily from Arapahoe County. And then there's the annual allocation, which we project to be $1.2 million a year based on our current revenue stream. As a side note, there's an additional $90,000 that we get a year from Jefferson County's open space for the little sliver of Jeffco that we are. We also get a little from Douglas County, but that's quite a bit smaller. So, those are part of the mix here, and we can talk about those uses if we want to. So basically, the recommendations from the task force were, of the existing reserve, what they wanted to look at was, the big challenge when you start looking at projects is, how do you compare playground rehabilitation to a trail? I mean, we've sat here in this room and talked about that challenge during the budget process, for example. So what the task force thought about was, it's probably best to look at percentage allocations that are targets within your funding streams and assign those to each of those type areas so that the parks projects are competing against parks projects. The trails projects are competing against trails acquisitions amongst themselves. So the basic recommendation for the reserve, first of all, is to have a set aside of some funds that can be utilized if a priority acquisition comes up. So there should be some in there for that. So the recommendation of the task force was about 38% of the current reserve would be targeted at acquisitions. 41% would be park rehabilitation, park improvement, and park rehab. This also includes South Platte Park, which we contribute a fair amount of money to each year. We can dive into that if we need to. And then the last one is trails. And then we moved into the annual. This was developed out of a consensus, and there was not a lot of variability, frankly. We all answered this question independently during the process as task force members, and the variability was actually very small amongst those of us that were on the task force. Within the annual appropriation, the target was to have 25% of that continue to go into that set aside for priority acquisitions and stay in reserve. 50% of that to go to park rehabilitations, kind of like the project we're doing in Harlow, those kind of things to, upgrade facilities, replace ones that are out of date or aren't ADA compliant, those kind of things. And we've talked about some of those projects before. And finally, the 25% for trails. This is the general recommendations that the task force came up with on how we should think about dividing the money. So what does that mean in terms of dollars? These don't all add up perfectly, but got to do a little rounding here and there. So if you take those percentages and overlay those over the value that we just talked about, you'll see some variability in there. There's one number that's wrong in there for sure, Parks Development Renewal. But this kind of breaks down the reality. The bottom chart should be 250, 500, and 250. So that's how that breaks out. So that's what it relates to in actual dollars for each of those accounts, in essence, related to those funding proportions. The note down there at the bottom is the Arapahoe County open space tax language only allows 20% of the annual allocation to go towards maintenance or management. Historically, that money has basically come first out of the chute to go to South Platte Park. The $90,000 from Jeffco goes into that pot as well, and then there's a chunk of general fund money that gets to the 360 or so this year that we have, and some conservation trust, that we roll all that money up to get to the 360 or so this year. Now that number, the challenges of maintaining a park of that size and the amenities and the age of things, that number continues to rise, but the percentage that comes from open space out of that total will continue to fall. There will be more general fund and other sources because you're at a 20% cap there. And that's the way historically we've gotten to that point.
So the South Platte Park maintenance sits in which line and how much is it?
Parks development renewal.
In the reserve or the annual scenario?
In the annual.
In the annual. And how much is it? How much is just South Platte Park?
$360,000 when you add up all the sources.
Yeah, so out of here, it would be about 190,000.
Just about 20%.
So 190, so 200,000 of the 500,000, which would be in this park and development line,
Right.
is specifically for South Platte Park. So then there's
Currently,
only,
using the current allocation, of course it can change.
And explain what that money is, what that pays for.
It pays for, South Suburban is managing the park for us. That goes to, operations, supporting Carson, supporting the security that's out there, in addition to just basic maintenance work from the trail. And obviously, we all know the level of use that facility gets. So no matter what you do, there's going to be some maintenance on that as we go through that. So that's kind of how that breakdown exists.
That's part of the river erosion too?
No.
Is that a different fund?
All right, so this is want to make these numbers as small as possible. Like the engineering slides we bring you in other presentations. So what we did was, we took a look at those buckets of proposed percentages, and then we took a look at what's proposed over the next 5 years related to what we know is in the recommendations. What do we know we've talked about with partners like South Platte Park, and move them into these categories. And that's what this 5-year document lays into. It shows you the revenue on the top side for annual revenue, and then the buckets down below and what that equates to in terms of the expenditures. You can specifically see that, South Platte Park is in there, like we just talked about. And it kind of breaks out across there, so. That's what the buckets look like over the next few years. We are in the process right now of preparing to submit applications to Arapahoe County Open Space for grant funds in addition to the $1.2 million allocation. This is a point you'll see in the recommendations that I'm going to highlight here as we go through this. Historically, Littleton has not been seeking grant funds for their projects. We have typically been a primary conduit for partner projects that we are doing. So for example, work on Harlow Park, in this particular case, we're applying on behalf of South Suburban Parks and Rec with us. So the challenge here is we only get 3 shots a year. It used to be more because the county used to have 2 cycles. Now they have 1, which has shortened the cycle for us. It's made it better for them, but it's a little more challenging because we have less opportunities. And so what that presents is if we make a decision policy-wise to become more of a primary applicant for ourselves and our own projects, that dynamically changes the relationship with our partners. Because our partners have planned on us continuing the existing relationship as it's been up till this point in time. So we're going to have to work through, if we go that direction, we're going to have to work through a policy relationship change with those partners. So that's something to be aware of out there. So the 3 projects that are on the radar screen for this year for the application process, and we do a lot of work. We make sure that we work with the Arapahoe County staff and feel them out on various things, and whether we think it'll be a good application or not. And, the basic groundwork you need to do to be successful. So this year, the projects that are in there are Harlow Park renovations and renewal. We've talked about that project up to now as well. Of that, it's a total of $1 million project, and of ours, we got $250 coming from us out of our open space, and then South Suburban is putting in $250, and then the other $500,000 comes in this additional grant, the additional grant we're seeking. We have a long history of partnering with Littleton Public Schools to rehabilitate and improve playgrounds with them at their school facilities. The reason for that is because normally, if you go by a school and you don't have that partnership, the playground is off limits. Next time you're driving through another community, you see a playground at an elementary school, it'll say, nobody allowed. But here, we have this partnership, so those become community assets. For example, in this particular one, there are no other playground facilities within a 2-mile radius of this location. So that's why it makes sense for us to partner with them to have a recreational facility within that area that we normally wouldn't have because we don't have a park facility to do it. So typically what we do is we are a grant applicant to them. We also historically have paid in an additional $50,000 to support the projects out of the general that's in the budget. We did that last year as well. So in this particular case, that total project's about $405, and our share is down there below. Reynolds Landing, Phase 2, for those of you not familiar with Reynolds Landing, obviously over the last 40 plus years, we have made a huge investment in the river. It is a critical asset to us as a community. Over the last decade, how we are dealing with the river has changed. As communities, we look at the river differently. We want to make it not only an access, a recreational access, but we want to improve the water quality, we want to improve the wetlands habitat, the animal habitat, and the general experience. So we've done a couple of those. Reynolds Landing Phase 1, if you've been out there, you already have seen the improvements. There's also some improvements further to the south where there's been some channelization to move the water flows into a better state, which increases fish habitat, all those types of things, fishing opportunities, and those kind of things. So that's the kind of work that's going on in the river, plus the amenities alongside, so that you have consistent access points for people. Everybody's not tearing up and down the bank, doing the erosion thing, like we just talked about.
So you just said that is a different fund, though, for erosion, right?
Yeah, it wasn't out of the park management fee, which was the other stuff that they were talking about. This came out of the open space. But
So we do some river erosion.
Yeah, and part of that too is there's another part of us that contributes here, and this is something that's also changing is how we look at stormwater management. The goal of stormwater management is water quality, and we want, if it hits the ground here, we want to make sure by the time it gets to the river, it's clean. And we're doing more of that. Like if you recall the Jackass Gulls project that we did last year, a lot of that you see is more of a naturalized environment as opposed to the old days when we, put some concrete trickle panels in and let it build up and then tip over the edge and keep going. We're using natural features in order to do those things now. So we have some partnership with that in this as well. So Reynolds Landing only shows $100,000. Reynolds Landing Phase 2 in total is going to cost about $14 million. We're still in the design stages that we're working through that. The primary lead on this project is urban drainage and flood control on behalf of a large number of partners. They led the first one. We've had great success with them in that process as a leader and as a partner. We expect another year or so of design, and then we'll be looking at how do we go forward financially towards the construction of the project, and how do we piece all the dollars together and make that happen.
Where does a project like Reynolds Landing fall into these three categories? Which one is it?
It's in the parks
So that's
redevelopment.
considered a park.
Yeah, and I know Keith touched on it, but we may want to rephrase this a little, just parks development renewal, that does include South Platte Park. So when we're talking about,
Because it's,
Yeah.
in some ways, because it's such a big piece that I think it makes it harder to, like I'm trying to, in my mind, say, okay, how much is going to this, this, and this? And, South Platte Park is one of those things, we're not touching, if we do nothing else, we're protecting South Platte Park. So I almost feel like that has to come out of the equation, and we always fund that separately, just from an optic perspective.
Yeah. From a staffing perspective, that's what we really do when we look at how the funds flow from a staff perspective.
I like our partnership with the schools. How many projects do we typically take on a year? Is it normally one? Or?
No, in my time here, we did one last year, and then there's this one.
Okay.
We're pretty much, based on my discussions with the district, they're kind of almost caught up.
Okay.
With ours. The one we did last year, the Field Elementary was last year. Field is actually not in the city. We had this discussion with council, but it's the vast majority of people that utilize the facility are from the city. It just happens to sit just outside of the boundary, so we still made the decision to participate in that project, even though it's kind of just outside of our boundary for various reasons as well. So.
And it is an unincorporated area. It's not like it falls within another city. So there was no other city who could have helped.
Yeah.
and the county did put money in for this. But we used to do a lot more, so
Well, sounds like
schools found out that there were these grants and there was this opportunity. We were doing at least a couple a year.
okay.
But like he says, now they're getting caught up. There's not that many more to do. But every time they come and ask everyone.
So we work with them. We have and beyond this, we have a good partnership with this district in so many other areas on a day-to-day basis that this happens to be one component of that. Yes, ma'am. No, it's okay. So basically, the task force came up with 8 recommendations, and I kind of pulled them into bullet points here from the report. Basically, the task force recommended that when we look at moving forward projects across all of the platforms, that we look to have declared support from all of our partners as we go forward with those, whether it be Arapahoe County, South Suburban, or, for example, GOCO. We have not chased a lot of GOCO money here. It's kind of been a lost opportunity for us, to be honest with you. If you look back at the amount of GOCO funds that have come directly into Littleton, that number is pretty small. So that's an opportunity for us to increase funding opportunities for projects here in Littleton by being more aggressive in our applications to the GOCO process, Great Outdoors Colorado, which is lottery money.
Littleton does that through South Platte Working Group because GOCO looks at wanting to have these larger partnerships. We were the recipient of their largest and final legacy grant. So they have changed a lot of the way they do things, and they're funding things differently than where our priorities were over the last couple of years. So I just want to make it clear that we have, they're on the radar. They are a major partner for consideration for partnering with South Platte Working Group.
That's correct. We have received GOCO funds for the river projects. We have no other locations we've chased GOCO projects, really. So when we start thinking about our other open space around here within the city, we need to look at those opportunities to bring GOCO dollars to the table in those areas as well. But we want to make sure that as we go forward, all the partners are on board in the direction we're going. The second one is we want to look for projects that have multiple objectives. The river work is a perfect example of that. We have in-river work that improves water quality, the recreational experience in the river, water flows, and all those experiences. In addition, it controls access to the river. So you don't have a whole bunch of community trails going into the river from every direction. And then it also provides a recreational amenity on the shore, areas for people to have large gatherings, small gatherings, just spend time there versus in the river. So it's a multiple objective kind of project. You may also have a play space in there, as an example too. When we do that, that gives us an opportunity to leverage funds, which is important, because for every dollar that we spend, we want to get the opportunity to make that dollar worth $3, $4, $5 by leveraging our dollars through partners. Obviously, we talked about hold a reserve for priority acquisitions. And when we talk about acquisitions, we need to talk about partnerships, which is kind of what's in this other table too, is that let's say we need $1 to buy a big piece of property. I wish we could get that kind of deal, but let's say we needed $1 for simplicity. If that's a situation for land acquisitions that we want to look to, maybe we bring 25 cents to the table. We look to the land trust to bring some funds to the table. We look to Arapahoe County. We look to South Suburban. We look to other partners to help us get that other 75 cents. So we're at basically a 3-to-1 ratio at that point in time. So that's the way that we want to look at leveraging for acquisitions. And we have a great history of that here. We definitely have a great history of that. Obviously, utilize the existing plans to set our priority lists as opposed to going out and recreating everything. The trails bucket in the plan is actually, there's not a list of trail projects in there. And this is one of the things that I talked with the task force a lot. We have a whole bunch of trail-related studies going on right now in here. So we probably should wait until the fall. The east-west connectivity study that we've talked about, which is connectivity between basically everything east of Santa Fe and the river, that's going to be finished in the fall. We have our own transportation master plan, the Highline Canal Working Group, their overall concept plan will be done by then, and then we'll move forward. One thing that I will say is when you look at all the plans coming up to this point in time, access to the Highline is a high priority in every single one of the plans. And the Highline is a changing dynamic for us. Denver Water is moving to a different model. They have very few downstream users. And the way it's managed now is South Suburban goes on either side of the trail a little bit, and the access points, and Denver Water does everything else. We are working with them on multiple things, from putting stormwater in there in the future, how do we manage all that. One of the big discussion points from a technical standpoint is if you don't run water in that ditch every year, you got a big tree stock out there that needs to drink. And so what does that happen to your canopy? Because a lot of people, that's a big part of the Highline Canal experience is the canopy. Additionally, this is a huge multi-jurisdictional, concept. There's 19 municipalities that touch the Highline from start to finish. So our recommendation is kind of wait in the fall. We'll have a better list to work from. We all need to remember the fact that the Arapahoe County open space tax sunsets in 4 years.
So why is that? So
When
this is the first time that I've heard that. So
When it went to the voters, which is very common, there's not a lot of, I haven't seen a lot of things go to the voters that don't have a sunset in them. Voters tend to be uncomfortable with perpetual taxes in Colorado. So they tend to go, I see a lot of open space around the state that are 10, 15, or 20 years is what we see. That's the tail end of this one. So there's two options at the end of that. Hopefully the voters re-up on that, which Arapahoe County would take forward. Or, we should still be considering other sources if all of a sudden that doesn't happen. If the community appetite's not there in 2022.
Add to that. It has been re-upped once already. So there was the original, and then there was a re-up, and the voters approved it overwhelmingly. And then this one, Arapahoe County, we're actually having conversations about actually going to the voters early on that, maybe 2 years out, and asking. And then that just kind of secures it. If the voters say no, then we've got another couple bites in the apple.
One of the trends related to that we're seeing, especially here in the Front Range, is, Boulder was the first community to put an open space tax like this in, and then it expanded throughout, most of the communities in the Front Range. The challenge has become is there's a lot less land to buy. So that's why a lot of the original open space taxes had 0% going to maintenance and management. It was all for acquisition. And that's transformed. And so as we move forward, we're in that same position with our partners. And so that 20% ratio is something that I think policymakers from all the communities in Arapahoe County and the Arapahoe County Commissioners need to be talking about in advance of taking that to the voters. What does that line in the sand need to be? 20%? Does it need to go to 30? Do we keep it there? And that's something all the policymakers in Arapahoe County need to be talking about prior to the time we get there, because it's a big issue. And then the last one is the comment I made earlier. If we change how we apply for grants, obviously that changes our relationship with our partners. And an example of this is exactly what happened in our budget process last year. When I came to you with the budget for open space last fall, there was 3 project partners that we proposed with South Suburban Parks and Rec. And council said, let's approve one and then let's go have the task force. So if we're going to go forward and we're only going to be the lead on 1 grant a year for South Suburban, we need to sit down and go through the planning process with them to understand how that impacts projects for us. As a side note, just popped back into my head, in the bond that they just approved related to that trail bucket, in 2021 and 2023, they have $100,000 each of those years set aside for trail work. A lot of it signage and access here in Littleton is part of their long-term plan. They have set that money aside in their plan. Just as a side note, as we work with them.
Why are you sharing that with us? Is it to, what is...
It's another data point that, as we look at those trail buckets, that's a point where if we know a partner has money set aside to utilize in Littleton in 2021, we need to be thinking about how we leverage that money most effectively in 2021 with a partner. So, we need to, that's part of looking ahead at where the partners are and where they want to go so that we can best utilize our dollars to be successful collectively.
So again, coming back to this, knowing that one of our partners has money set aside for trails, that's why it also makes sense that we're setting money aside for trails, among other reasons why we're setting money aside for trails.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things that we've talked a lot about even in this group is trail connectivity, trailheads. How do we bring our trail systems together in a new and collective way so they're a wider use to the community in general. Obviously, one of the things we talked about a lot is leveraging. We talked about that during this conversation. The task force believes that for new trails, parks, acquisitions, we should at least have a 1-to-2 ratio on leveraging of every one of our dollars. And we want to look to upgrades and improvements at a 1-to-1 ratio. That's based on our history of being able to find dollars with partners, and we feel like this is a good leverage point based on what the task force talked about. I wanted to add in a note that I put in the end of the report with the task force. We currently have 3 things that we know we're going to talk about forthcoming that are currently unbudgeted and unplanned related to the long-term plans for open space. We obviously, Hudson Gardens is in the process of thinking about their strategic plan going forward. We've been a long-time partner in them. Some of the work we do with them can use open space money, some cannot. So that's a process we have to go through examining. But that is not budgeted in any of these plans. The Saperchi property, which is that picture in the right-hand corner, that's the inside of the house. We took that over last summer. We've owned the property for quite a while now, and with the family changes, we took that property over this past summer, and we have not designated a use for that yet. What we've talked about is all the stuff around that is being designed now as part of the master plan for Reynolds Landing Phase 2, and what we've talked about is adding that to that contract to allow the same design team to work on that. But we still need to have a policy discussion about what do we conceptually want to see there. Do you want it to be a Carson North, for example? Do you want to make it classroom space? What do you want to do from a public accessibility standpoint so that the designers have some ideas on that? Right now, we basically monitor the property between us, our staff, South Suburban's rangers, and our police department. That's what we're doing right now. Finally, I know that in the Transportation Master Plan, one of the gaps that we have identified transportation-wise in the community is we have a whole bunch of great neighborhood parks with no sidewalks to them. So we've got some issues with neighborhood connectivity and as well as ADA compliance in those areas. So we know that that's going to come out of our next round of work on the transportation side. So those three things are all in there. They're currently unfunded that we need to think about going forward in the future. And that's all I wanted to cover, basically. In the other two documents you have, there's a lot of stuff on here. This is a map of all of our open space. And it's,
That we own. And is there open space that we don't own? Or partnership?
It's all ownership. We don't, I'm not aware of anything in town that we don't own that another entity owns, other than, say, the school district.
South Suburban owns some things. They
Yeah.
own part of Lake Gulch.
Yeah.
They own some of it.
Small portions, pretty small portions. Obviously, the Highline's not in there and that kind of thing, too. So that, when you look at that, though, one of the things that's really cool is, first of all, there's a lot of highlighted areas on the map. And one of the things that I think is most exciting about this map when you look at it in a whole is there is open space spread throughout the city. Sometimes you see it congregated just because of the way it was bought in some cities, but we've been fortunate over time to create a network of open space that spans our entire community, which is a real positive thing that our predecessors have all done to get us to that point. And then, just as a final note, this other chart here lists, these are some of our common partners when we go through projects. Obviously, South Suburban, Arapahoe County Open Space, South Platte Working Group, which we've talked about earlier. Urban Drainage and Flood Control is a big partner with us, especially related to the river and water quality. The Highline Canal Working Group, they're working their way towards a new framework of what that's going to be. That process is a lot of public engagement right now. If you haven't been involved in that, there's some really cool stuff to look at about what you're going to look like for 91 miles, frankly. And then Trust for Public Land, if you're not familiar with them, their goal is to assist communities around the country to preserve open space and utilize it for parks and recreation, and enhance that space as well. They've been a partner with us here on previous acquisitions. And then Littleton Public Schools has also been a partner. These are our primary partners over the last several years, is what you see right there. So from the task force perspective, the direction was to kind of take a look at our other reports, bring things together, and bring some recommendations back to City Council to consider. We put several of those out there, and a lot of those are policy decisions. So that's why we're here. We're looking for feedback, obviously, and those kind of things, and where we're going to go.
So I think the one thing, playing off of what Karina said, is pulling out South Platte Park.
It's all mine.
Yeah, as its own thing, so, to see what that would look like.
Is it a fair statement to say, if I was to ask you, what does this look like now? And the answer would be, it changes every year, potentially. Or, what does this look like now? What did it look like this past year? What did it look like
It's actually probably pretty close to that now. If you look at the last few years, it's just kind of the way it's broken out with our partners. But, even if we set a percentage like 40, there's going to be some variability. We don't want to stick, one of the task force discussions was, you don't want to stick a stake in the sand at 40 when you can spend 41% and accomplish something, out of one bucket or the other. So historically, we've been pretty close to that ratio that you see right there.
We did in the council packet, we did go through the current 5-year plan that we presented during the budget, and we re-presented it to you based on these allocation recommendations. Tiffany and I thought that probably a few of our previously proposed projects would no longer be able to be funded with this new allocation, but we were pleasantly surprised. There's actually only one that doesn't fall within the annual allocation amount, and there's plenty of reserve money for that particular project, for that type of project. So everything we currently have presented to you in the 5-year plan would still be able to be funded using this allocation method.
So based on that, then I'm surprised surprised. I guess I didn't expect that we would have money being set aside for acquisition, but you're saying we have been, even maybe unintentionally, but we have had things in reserve.
We have enough in reserve that we can set aside a certain amount for acquisition. We don't currently have any real acquisition planned in our 5-year plan. I know that you can't see it on the slideshow, but the acquisitions line for the 5-year plan is 0 all the way across.
But our plan is
But
always to
that
have
doesn't-
money.
Exactly.
Right.
That doesn't mean you can't spend the money, and there's plenty in reserves that we could set aside that acquisition money and continue to fund an annual amount that would just be socked away in reserves until you come up with something to spend it on.
And when you, okay, Claire, when you say reserves, we don't have a reserve fund.
We have a fund balance,
Right.
money at the end of the year that we can't spend on anything other than open space.
Right.
So if it's not budgeted to be spent, it goes into
Stays.
what I am calling a reserve, but a fund balance.
Fund balance.
Okay, okay.
And that's where we have our acquisition money, right? Yeah.
And if you go back to the 2012 task force report, look at that, one of the recommendations at that time was we need to be prepared to, if something becomes available, we need to be prepared to go get it if the opportunity comes along with our partners. And so, that reserve's kind of been ongoing from that time at least forward to get to the state we're at right now.
One of the things about the 2012 plan is that during that time, during that period, land was really inexpensive. Because, and particularly when you were buying for open space and you were buying some of these distressed properties, the old Murray property that had a bunch of school buses painted green that were supposed to be his fence, and he had a couple houses back there. Well, it's now, so that was one of the properties that we targeted, we bought, and now it has been turned into a outdoor experience with enhanced improvements along the driveway. And if you haven't been over there to take a look at it, you should, because that's what open space money, when it's leveraged along the river, does. And so a lot of those distressed properties we were able to get at that time and purchase, and then we did drop some master plans on them, and we have been able to execute a number of those. Now we're in a situation where land is a lot more expensive, and because we were so, I think, thoughtful and smart about grabbing up what we could when it became available or when it wasn't available, but we took a stab at it and got it. Now it's fewer and farther in between, but the ones that are left and the areas where there is a potential and an opportunity, there's a higher level of risk for them not to be considered for acquisition because of some of the land use that we've got on it and some of the other stuff that's going on around it. So acquisition it's equally as important and not going to be as aggressive with it, but it's almost at a point where some of the risk involved by not doing it is so much greater than to do it. So the other thing I've just got to say that looking at this 5-year, and to me it's, because my head, and I've talked to Keith about this, and I think this was one of my struggles even when we were working on the task force, is my head, South Platte Park, there's two funds, 2 line items for me for South Platte Park. It's what we spend every year because we have to. Because we have a maintenance agreement with South Suburban and we have to spend that money. Because that is where that $300,000, that is what that is. And then there's everything else. There's Reynolds Landing, there's Saperchi, there's Riverwork, there's, down there at Riverside Downs. That was part of this. And there's some tweaks that need to be made down there. So, is there a way we can separate South Platte Park from mandatory maintenance to planning and projects or something?
Yeah,
Break it out on this 5 years so we can see that better.
The maintenance piece is broken out on the 5-year plan as its own separate line item, and from what I understand, that is only maintenance. That is not additional projects within South Platte Park. That is just the maintenance piece.
Yeah, so
I know
maybe
it's
what
not
this
always-
is this is for council. This is to take that parks development renewal and make a decision about the percentage and what kind of percentage we want to put into South Platte Park and leave into what we would consider other traditional parks and playgrounds.
So
And
you have
we
an account
have
for
to
it.
split, maybe we have to divide it up again.
So we have an account for that, is that right?
It has its own
And
separate.
do we have sub-accounts within there?
Within
Within
the
that
South
account?
Platte Park piece?
Yeah.
No, we've got multiple account lines in each of the funds that make up the total 360, but there's not a sub-account within those line items. It all goes toward operations and maintenance. We're billed just once a year.
Well, and it still would. I'm just talking about for us.
As a line item and as a percentage of that allocation recommendation, you say whatever that percentage is, have its own little, green color, whatever it's 15, 20% of whatever it is, just so that's highlighted.
To answer that question, we do have the detail to know what projects we've built that are outside of that category in South Platte Park the last several years. It's great to talk about sexy projects like Reynolds Landing, but we had to work on repaving the parking lot at Carson. Those are not quite as sexy as Reynolds Landing, and those are things that we have to do as well. Or trail widening or those kind of things that are part of the regular maintenance in that capital line that we were just talking about. Those are in there too. So.
So I'm coming back to your 5-year, just to understand that. When I look at the section projects, I see so let's look at the total 2019, 2023. So we see the South Platte Park, which we've talked about, that we have we've broken it out of what's maintenance. So in this case, that South Platte Park is maintenance. That's where we do that. And then we have the parks development and renewal. So that's 4.6 million over the 5-year period. Then we have trails and connections. That's 2.2. Then acquisitions, I see 0. But we're recommending that in the annual, 25% will go through acquisitions. And so would this start looking different for us? Is that what's going to happen? That there would actually be money on this line C?
It would depend. So if we're not spending it, since it's 0, you can see the 0 there. Since we're not spending anything right now in our 5-year plan, you can see at the bottom that the remaining fund balance goes up by that 250 each year.
20%.
So if you don't spend the acquisitions, it would go into the fund balance set aside for acquisitions still. We can add into the 5-year plan if you would like an acquisitions bucket and just change it every year. If you don't spend it, then it's still budgeted. But in the past, we normally have only budgeted things that are specific projects that we do intend to do the next year. If an acquisition comes up, then we bring it to council and ask for additional appropriation for that parcel.
So that 25% allocation just rolls into the fund
It
balance.
rolls each year.
And so do we have to make that as part of like a policy that we would, if not spend, 25% goes into reserve specifically to the acquisition budget? Is that like
It would be.
an action we have to take?
Yeah, and I think here this fall, again, we're talking about the methodology, if this makes sense, then this fall, we would have a deeper conversation about some of the projects in detail. And at that time, you would be looking to adopt the 5-year plan and any policy connected to it.
I would just like to point out that those were targets. If we need to spend 45% something else, it may not be 25%. We could, of that target for allocations, maybe 18% or whatever it gets moved in, if it makes more sense to go over that.
Coming back to what you're asking then, Keith, of us today is the process and methodology on the funding, which is essentially this.
Right.
And what I also heard you say is this is pretty much what we've been doing informally. So we really haven't changed the process, we're just formalizing what we've been doing.
How we're spending the money, yes.
How we're spending the money.
Right.
And so, I guess I was hoping to see a change, right? My reaction during the budget process, like it felt that we were doing parks and not see it. I may not have seen it last year, but I may see it this year. So that'll come forward. I am surprised to see that Trails has a low percentage assigned to it, given all of the studies that are being done, recognizing this is a huge focus to enhance our trail, our connectivity came back in our Envision plan. So I was surprised to see that this percentage is low. Can you guys talk about?
Yes, that was a huge, basically, I would say that the discussion of what that funding looks like and how it be allocated, that was probably 50% of the time the task force sat. And part of what we did in that process, I can tell you how the process went, is that the consultant actually sent an email to all of us on the task force independently and said, how do you think, if you got $1 to spend, how do you think you ought to break that dollar out? And ironically, not ironically, but it was very darn close across the board. There was a little bit of variability, frankly, between parks development and trails, but not very much. And that's based on, you saw the 5 people, so they're all coming from sort of a different, or 6 people with a different target to get there. And, somebody like Arapahoe County Open Space is not only doing their own projects, but they're seeing everybody else's projects in the county, is how they look at it. And each one came with a different tactic, and they kind of settled down in the same place.
Well, and I think Trails is related to connectivity and the fact that we've got, so Trails includes more than just making a neighborhood park accessible with a sidewalk. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I'm back at South Platte Park.
Your baby.
But there's a trail down there that's 5 feet wide that needs to be 10 foot wide. And that's going to take an awful lot of money, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of planning, and we're going to have to do it at some point because it's a safety issue, it's a quality of life issue, it's a being able to keep that park let that park live at a level that it is being loved. And by not doing that, we're squeezing usages into a place where we're going to actually create an experience that isn't fun. That's a longer term project, but that needs to be planned for, and that needs to be budgeted for, and so then that can be kind of pulled out of there. I think each of these has their own set of projects underneath it that then have the money next to it. So you've got trails, and you may have 4 little projects underneath there, and we have to assign a dollar amount to those and a timeline to those so that we understand how we're going to appropriate these out and spend them out. One of the things I think about these sort of projects is that there's the planning, there's first the, let's do it, and then there's the whole planning of that. And then once that planning's done, then the master plan gets approved, and then you start putting all these dollars to what that's going to cost. And then comes these big numbers, and then we start to have to appropriate, okay, in year 1, we're going to get $500,000 at Reynolds Landing. We did I actually call it phase 2 at Reynolds Landing, where we put in the new bathroom and the new parking lot and all of that. And that's how that had to happen. And we had the money, we got the partnerships, we were able to do that. So none of these things happen with one sweep. It's just that process.
So that was, I think you're bringing up that point. I was surprised that Trails was so low.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are talking about so many gaps in our trail systems, not only in a connectivity, but also the amenities along the trail, et cetera. So I'm just surprised that that's lower, and I don't know if anybody else feels the same way. Just given the plans that are out there, the things we consistently talk amongst ourselves and also hear from our citizens about improving connectivity. So we're kind of investing the same amount of money that we did in the past.
We can change these percentages. I think part of the reason is that there was so much of it when you think about, like Keith said, you get $1. How do you break that out? Parks development renewal. That's the big money. That's
because it costs
incredibly
more
expensive.
In addition to that, there's 2 components to both of those. The one, part of what's driving the parks redevelopment is deferred maintenance over time. Like in Harlem, we're talking a 30-plus-year-old playground. just, those things, we've gotten to that point where we have to do that from a maintenance perspective. One of the other dynamics too with trails is accessibility points to trails, signage, and then the other part is, this happens in discussions I have with citizens, for example, all the time. Not every trail is designed to be hard surfaced. And, you have to have those balances in your system. And that's part of understanding your total trail network. And we've done that up to this point in partnership with South Suburban and with Arapahoe County. Big trail projects are things like big dollars or are putting pedestrian underpasses on Broadway for the High Line. Or do you reroute the trail so it stays west of Broadway all the way? So people aren't crossing Broadway for that little loop in the High Line. So those are decisions you have to make, because an underpass is $1 million plus. It's probably more than that at that particular location, just the width of the road. So
I feel like there's a little bit of a wait and see. We have some new trail plans coming.
Yep.
And I think once that comes forward, then we may have to relook at this, right?
Yeah, to me, I think beyond, as Mark talked about, beyond the sort of policy adoption and the budget and the 5-year plan, one of the things that I think is really important about this from an execution standpoint is if we're able to understand our funding for the next 5 years, we have a greater opportunity to seek partners and seek additional grant money to leverage those dollars. The further in advance we know that, the better chance we have to be successful in leveraging those dollars. So having that longer-term plan is an opportunity for greater success, I think, over time.
I do have a question. Harlow Park isn't on here as something we own. Who owns it? South Suburban?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Also with James Taylor right up the street.
Yeah.
I think it would be good if we could get a list of the parks that, the land and the property in Littleton and South Suburban.
Yeah, this was prepared out of the current GIS database.
Yeah, that's okay.
This morning.
No, I think this is.
No,
I think this is a great map, but I think it would be interesting to know, because I do know that we had the Lee Gulch overlook, the front part of that Lee Gulch had a building on it, and that building, that part of it, we were doing the negotiation for that, the city bought the back part of that Lee Gulch overlook as open space. And South Suburban held on to that front part, because it continues to be an opportunity if they ever wanted to, and this was part of the discussion when we were working with them, if they ever wanted to turn around and sell it, then they could do that, because that's not considered city open space, which would have to go to a vote of the voters. So they could sell it, it has existing zoning. We did not rezone it. So there's no, to see what those are out there, I think would be valuable.
Because they could be risks that they no longer are open space. So like I see Reynolds Landing on here too, maybe it's just.
We do own most of Reynolds Landing, I think.
That's what I thought, but maybe this is just not.
Yeah, this is in the current database. I actually was hopeful that, with our short timeline on this particular item, I was hopeful to have a much bigger map, but that was not going to be available in our short time frame for tonight. So we'll get you a little bit different documents. So you can see that.
So going beyond I'm sorry that I'm spending a lot of time on this. So going beyond the process on funding, and I think, makes sense that we at least formalize what we've been doing so that we can plan long-term from a financial perspective. The second piece that I don't think was addressed here, or maybe hasn't been concluded on, is then prioritizing within. For example, when we look at open space and the purchase of open space, why is one property more important than another one? So is that something that you foresee as being kind of a next step? Like coming back to the list of 16, of which 9 are gone?
One of the things the task force said is those lists already exist. For example, in our currently adopted open space and trails master plan, there's a priority list in there that's adopted. And so from a task force work, we looked at those existing plans and there's priorities in those plans. And that's where we looked at from a priority standpoint, already adopted plans.
So there is a prioritization of, so I saw the prioritization of parks. And then, so there's prioritization of trails, there's prioritization of open space.
That's
just
correct.
don't have it here. And that's what was used in this.
That's correct. That's in the adopted master plan from 2016.
Mayor, if I may just add a little to that. I think the opportunity to be very specific about the projects you intend is obviously the budget process itself here in the fall. And so I think the advantage of this task force work is to create this methodology for which we have a little more context in making some decisions about what to fund and what category. But again, the very specific projects would be tagged in the fall. And I think that's something I just want to make sure we work towards. And so take trails, for example. I think we have a whole list, multiple studies, and I think that staff's intent here to take a lot of that, whatever's been prioritized, and try to suggest to council in that process and let you confirm, are those the projects you specifically want to tackle in trails based on previous studies, based on this methodology?
I had sent out a proposal or an ask. Can we go through that now, or is there something else that we need to give you feedback?
Yeah, we could go through that now, and essentially what that will be doing is just moving into the priority list that we consider a budget.
So as we think about, the plans that are out there, projects that may have been out there in the past, and also looking at where the city is now and what we're looking to continue to develop, there's the community trail that is relatively new. And one of the areas, as I walked along that, is, call it the east of the tracks. And it just feels like a missed opportunity to create more engagement along that community trail. And it also really highlights a beautiful view of our downtown.
You're talking about that strip of land as it goes over the hump?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so you have a picture here of where it's located. I believe this is something that has been kind of brought forward or has been talked about for a couple of years, but I think for me it really came to head as we were going through the Envision process as well about creating, there was this word that came out, creating these vistas in our community, and I just felt really strongly that this is something that we should look at as an opportunity and ask staff to do some diligence on what this could potentially be developed into. Obviously, what cost may come into play, and also what partners we could work with. So this is simply just an ask for allowing staff to go and do some diligence on this area and the value of further developing along the community trail.
You do that already, Keith? Because that's railroad land, right?
I give you some baseline information. That particular section is within the BNSF right-of-way. We approach BNSF if they're interested in selling that. Thankfully, they have a new real estate firm representing them, and those of us that had to deal with this in the past, this was awesome to actually have a phone call return. They have basically said that they're, as a company, not selling any adjacent right-of-way at this time because, frankly, the freight rail system in the United States is maxed out. So that's what's driving them. The community trail, which is there today, is currently in a 25-year lease with the railroad, and South Suburban Parks and Rec holds that lease. We do not hold that lease. If you want to try and figure it out and look at the actual lease, good luck looking at the railroad map on the back. It's I think they created it in 1950 and pieced it together. South Suburban approached BNSF and said, are you open to some adjustments in the lease? And they said, yeah, we'll consider some options. That particular spot is also in the floodway from where Stern Park comes out and down through there. So it's in the floodway, not just a floodplain for this particular location as well. It'll be a very interesting water feature if it does flood there going on the railroad tracks from a perspective.
I think in one of the plans water features.
Yeah.
There is, we just haven't put any yet.
I mean, some of the other things we have, when we look at locations like this, we have to look at things like how far is irrigation, do we have to pay a, $25,000 tap fee with Denver Water to, get irrigation there? And what does maintenance look like? So those are all things that we have to consider. In this particular project, we would have to consider this in partnership with South Suburban. I know that their board has had some discussion about this project to date already. So we can certainly work with South Suburban staff. We've talked about this project already from a staff perspective.
So I guess what I'm asking is, let's formalize that. So that, it sounds like probably acquisition's not in the cards, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be. So I think what I'm just asking for is, what are some possibilities along this community trail to, I'm calling it a pocket park. We can call it, I'll let the experts design for the area. And just say, just to bring it back to council and say, here's what we are potentially looking at. Here are some obstacles we may need to overcome, and then take it from there.
Just as from a staff perspective, that due diligence is going to be, I'm just going to say, I'm going to make it a joint project with South Suburban, because what we bring to you all has to go, I would say, we need to share at the same time with South Suburban's board as well. I think would be the, since it's anything there's going to be joint, that's what I would probably do with their staff.
Yeah. Keith, are there things that will not get done that you were planning to do if you elevate this on your priority list?
I don't know that, because I'm not sure what this costs.
I'm talking about time.
We have a fair amount of, we already know what it costs to do things. And some things like taps, we've been asked that question a lot by, for example, the Crab Apple Association.
Yes.
So, and we can't put crab apples everywhere, for various reasons, but, so we have some background in this already. And to me, one of the things I think that, always, when we go with a project like this, to me, is always the maintenance question in perpetuity. Because that's always a big challenge for us, and it's something we can't spend open space money on, whether it's us or South Suburban. So we'll take a look at that too, what the annual maintenance number is going to be on that too.
And it seems like you did do that homework 2 or 3 years ago, and we had this same conversation, or similar conversation. So
We had it when we ratified this, because that piece of property is in here.
Yeah.
2012 report.
So this property is in there?
And it part of the criteria that was used on that property was, what we used on all the acquisition potentials were, is it available for sale? And if it is, are they willing to let the city buy it? What is its connection to other parks? Those types of things. And then how much money would it cost? And this one, it didn't score real highly because of the state land, the state, the railroad, and then the connectivity even further down to the state land board, and they told us to go down sand too. And so it was not that whole connection there. We even had, you'll see in here, with the depot and stuff like that. That was quite a challenge with that. And that was one of those things, listen, if it's this hard to do, it's probably going to be a problem.
Getting the trail was a success. That was tough enough to get.
Yeah, and some of that is on land that was not granted permission to put that trail on. So there's still some challenges with that. And so you'll see in here that there were some challenges. Part of it is because of the ownership around it. And that's always the challenge with acquisition. And also with doing anything is that one of the things that we were looking at here was, if we don't own it, then what do we really want to do with it? Because anything we do with it is a whole different way of handling that. And then where's the maintenance come in and those types of things. So it was really about.
That's the big.
And Trust for Public Land was on this group also, and they were really big on that. You guys really cannot dive into this stuff unless you've got some ownership in this stuff. So if it was easy.
Well, I see this as an opportunity. I almost look at this as a catalyst of what more can come. So by engaging, by having a reason to engage more so with this trail, I think begins to opportunity of what more can come. That may be worth that significant effort. So for me, right now, it's more of, like I said, the diligence. It is very clear we can't own the land, so then we have to take that into account of how much do we want to invest from a maintenance and development to at least then make that decision to say, you know what, it's nominal, it's a community amenity, we're willing to make that investment, or to say it's still incredibly significant and may not make sense in light of these other restrictions.
Well, and I would suggest too that if you, again, when you look at these things, instead of looking at them one-off, maybe look at the entire community trail and make a plan about long-term, where are places where we can have a cutout for a place to sit, where are good places to put plantings or stuff like that, and to try to look at it as a whole instead of just individual places. Because it's that one-off thing that when you do master planning, you're like, oh, why did we do that there? Now,
So I think that's exactly, so this community trail planning, I don't see that.
That document exists.
That does?
Yep, last year out of Public Works budget, in response to one particular group that wanted certain things. We partnered.
So is it a formal plan that was adopted by the city?
It's not really our plan, it would be South Suburban's plan. But we worked with South Suburban and the original design firm that did the community trail design to do a new design document which identified areas for plantings, for pullouts, where you might have benches. That document exists.
Is what?
That document exists and it was created in the last 12 months.
But was it adopted?
No, we didn't have anything, we wouldn't have brought it forward to city council. It was in response to particular questions from the
We
community.
discussed it, yeah, as far as.
Yeah,
we never saw it.
yeah. We didn't have any reason to bring it forward because there's an existing plan for the trail. And this is just taking that document, basically, adding some aerials and planning to that related to plantings. For example, part of what we had to look at is we don't want to plant crab apples in riparian areas. So we need to look at those kind of things. So, we have that document. I can send it out to everybody. You want it?
Well, I think it comes, it's part of what you can bring back to us, right? That here's what the original community trail plan was, here's what a potential phase 2 could be in a bigger picture perspective, and what I'm suggesting here may be a phase 1.
You're gonna send a plan, whatever it is you have?
It's really just a one-page document.
Suggestion. If I could make a suggestion here, Karina, check me if this kind of meets your intent here, but I think if council is willing, we certainly can add this to the planning process so that when it comes back to you in the fall, again, back to this methodology, and we start talking about trails as an example, this could be a potential project, and we could be very specific about this one and trying to contrast it against others, and you can have a discussion and make a decision about where you might want to place that. We can do this evaluation based on this plan that Keith's talking about. We can kind of share that information. And so you have a little larger context about where this one could go relative to maybe a larger concept along that community.
At least address it.